Hello and welcome to Design Emergency Podcast. I'm Alice Rawsthorn, co-founder of Design Emergency with Paola Antonelli, and we're delighted that our interviewee for this episode is the architect and pioneer of climatic architecture, Philippe Rahm. Since the start, Design Emergency has shared the stories of ingenious and resourceful designers, architects, engineers and others who are developing the radical solutions we need to tackle the complex challenges of this intensely volatile, often ominous time. The climate emergency is one of the most crucial of those challenges, and we've explored many different design responses to it, from rewilding stricken farmland and growing forests in arid desert to reusing existing buildings rather than constructing new ones. Philippe is at the forefront of this process through his experiments with climatic architecture, the theme and title of his latest book. Born in Switzerland, he studied architecture there and in France, where he's now based as principal of Philippe Rahm Architectes, which he founded 10 years ago in Paris. Philippe's mission is to enable buildings to become more ecologically responsible by aligning them with their locations and climates to make the most of their light, humidity, and other natural phenomena to minimize the use of fossil fuels in heating or cooling them. His completed and ongoing projects include the Jade Eco Park in the Taiwanese city of Taichung, the entrance to Maison de la Radio et de la Musique in Paris, and working with OMA, the Scalo Farini project to develop a disused rail yard in Milan. So Philippe, welcome to Design Emergency. And let's begin at the beginning with what is climatic architecture?
Hello, Alice, and thank you for inviting me. So climatic architecture, the basic idea is that if we look to the reason why we need architecture, the basic reason is the human body is always at 37 degrees Celsius, and we have to keep this temperature at 37 degrees Celsius. And the reason of architecture is to build a kind of microclimate around the body, because we need a temperature outside of the body in between 20 and 28 degrees Celsius. And so to keep this type of climate around the body, we need to build something. And the very beginning of architecture is about that. It's to create a warm space when it's cold outside, or a cold space when it's too warm outside. So the origin of architecture is climatic in reality. And then if we look to the consequence of architecture today, we know that 39% of the CO2 emission are coming from the field of building. And so it means that the consequence of architecture is climatic too, because it produces global warming. So in between the beginning of architecture and the consequence of architecture, we are designing building. And my position was to say why we cannot also work on climate for composing, for designing, why we need to work with geometry or with analogy or with metaphor, why we cannot use climate for designing architecture. So from that, I say maybe we can use some real climatic phenomena for designing building or landscape or urban design, to work on, for example, on convection, thermal convection, or thermal conduction, or thermal emissivity, or thermal effusivity, or evaporation. So to start to compose with that, and maybe less with geometry, but with this type of phenomena. So the idea of climatic architecture is to say, okay, maybe the element of architecture can be heat, humidity, and the element of composition can be convection, conduction. So this is what I have called climatic architecture. It is to use climatic phenomena in the design.
And when did you decide to focus your work on it? And why do you consider it to be so important?
So at the beginning, when I started to be an architect, I was interested into the space. This is something very common in architecture. We say the architect is designing space. But when you look to space on the paper, it's something white and you have the black wall around the void, around the space. But in reality, the space is not completely empty. It's not nothing, and you have the solid elements, the wall, that are creating a difference between space and solid. But the void, the space itself, in reality, contains a lot of things. It contains some particles, some chemical particles, some electromagnetic wavelengths. So it means that the void, the space, is a material. It's something that's not completely void. It's made of things. So when I really begin my practice, I was challenging that. I was saying maybe we can define the space in the chemical, physical element.
And so in practical terms, can you describe what the impact of the deployment of climatic architecture would have on key areas of your work? So if we begin with a building.
So it's mean for example, when you compose a building, so I can give like two examples. One example was thermal insulation. So, it became a necessity to have a thermal insulation of 20-25 centimeter around the building. And so when this necessity arrived, it was like, you have to do that. You have to place 25 centimeter of thermal insulation to decrease the consumption of energy, so to decrease the CO2 emission. And so when it arrived, the architect took that only like a norm, like just a constraint, and it was a technical constraint, and so it was not subject to design. So it was okay. We have to do that, and some architects were complaining about that, against this new necessity to do that. And so what I did at that moment, I say, okay, maybe the thermal insulation can be a design strategy, it can be something that we can design. So it means that, for example, we made a project once that was about double glazing. You have you have a single glass, and then you have 2 glass or 3 glass, for having a good thermal insulation window, for example. And so at one moment you understand, okay, before the interior was inside and the exterior outside the glass. But now you have 2 glass or 3 layers of glass. So is the interior after the first glass or after the second glass or after the third glass? So it means that there is a blurring of interior and exterior. And at once moment, I was thinking, can we inhabit inside the double glazing? So can we enlarge the window and start to create space inside the window? And is it possible to inhabit inside the window? So we did a museum that was starting to layering the facade, to not have a single line for the facade, but by looking for the different layer of the facade and then creating space in between, for example, the 2 layers of glass. But after that, we for a building in Taiwan for the climatorium, we made different layers. One layer was the waterproof layer, and then the thermal insulation layer, and then the load-bearing layer. And we create gap in between, and we can live in between the layers. So it means, for example, inside the thermal insulation, you have air conditioning, but outside you can have space with natural ventilation. So, for example, the corridor or the toilet or storage don't need air conditioning. So it can be after the thermal insulation, but before the waterproofing. So in this context, I was challenging conduction, thermal conduction, by creating these different layers. So it was like Russian puppet a little. You have different layer, and you start to create some different quality of space with different climate inside, and you can design with conduction and with thermal insulation, not to accept that is only a new norm. I can give another example about convection. Thermal convection, this is the air, the cold air go down and the warm air go up. So this is because the air, when it's warm, it's less dense, so it's more light, and so it go up, and the cold air go down. So from that, very often when you heat in the winter, for example, if you are heating a space, warming a space, it will be all the way, the warm air will go under the ceiling, and on the floor level, on the floor, it will be cold. It stay little colder than on the ceiling. So it means that in reality, because we are living down, if it is cold inside, we are turning on the radiator, but it's becoming more and more hot under the ceiling, and nobody are there. And down, it's still cold. It stay a little colder. So it means if you know that and you want economize energy, because you say, okay, we don't need to have so much energy under the ceiling, so much heat under the ceiling because nobody are there. Can we start to compose with convection? And so I did a different project based on that. For example, I start to imagine to say, okay, in reality, maybe if we design one house in a section, and you say, okay, naturally there is some space that need less heat, for example, like a corridor or like a bedroom because you are under the blanket, so it can be a little colder. And then we start to have different room at different height. So we work with the kind of altitude inside of the house, and we place the room where you are naked or wet, like a bathroom, at the top of the house, because you will receive all the energy and the heat there. And so it means that you can compose in the different layer of the air, in the verticality of the convection movement. So it means that maybe it changed because it's no more completely the social convention that are creating the organization of the house, of the function of the house, but it's becoming more the climatic phenomena that are organizing the form of the house. And then from that, you can also, for example, work on pressure and to say, okay, if the house sometimes is larger and sometimes is narrow, so you can accelerate the air movement, and maybe where you need more ventilation, it can be narrow, and when you want less ventilation, it becomes larger. So at that moment, you think that a house can be a river of air, or a wind, that you are creating indoor wind. So this is how, this type of way of thinking and a way of designing by using the element, the climatic element, in order to economize energy, to create some more comfortable space in some area, and maybe less comfortable space in some area, because we can accept that there is less comfortable space somewhere. So it's to take seriously all this climatic approach and to see how it can be combined with physical and chemical way of designing and climatic phenomena.
And similarly, how can the same principles be applied to an interior?
Alors, for the interior, it's really interesting because if you look back in the history, you can see that before air conditioning, for example, or before radiator, so it means before the end of the 19th century, the choice of material and the choice of the form was basically linked also with climate. For example, I can give two examples. One example is the height of the room. For my generation, we were thinking, for example, if you are talking about a church, we know that a church is very high. The French cathedral, for example, is very high, and for me, it was because of spiritual reason. You are looking for God, for the verticality of the sky, something like that. But when you read Claude Perrault translation of Vitruvius, he's explaining that why the ceiling of the church have to be high. If it is because if you have a lot of people in a room, like a church, with a low ceiling, it will be too hot and too no more air. So you need to have a very large ceiling. So the basic reason was climatic, and this is something that we have lost. We are thinking only in terms of symbolism, but no more in terms of climatic reason for designing the height of the room. And so, for example, in the cold latitude, it's better to have low ceiling. In a warm climate, it's better to have high ceiling. You can see that for example, in Palermo, in Sicilia, you have high ceiling palazzo, and in Germany, or maybe you have low ceiling room, so this is this type of difference. So it's quite challenging because, it's challenging the form, linked to convection, challenging the type of material with thermal effusivity, or, it's like resetting how you make decision in architecture or for building. So this is what I think it's quite challenging for us, for our generation, because at one moment you are remaking some decision linked to what happened today with the global warming, with heat wave, with the energy consumption, and it's also interesting in terms of culture, because it go back to the history and you can relearn from the past, a lot of things that was made, and some decision and some philosophy also that was made before air conditioning. So this is about the interior space.
So if we look at an area of your work which doesn't require radiators or air conditioning, but you've done a lot of projects in landscape, how do the principles of climatic architecture work in practice there?
So this is something that we are doing in my office. We are doing at different scales. So it can be building, interior, or landscape, or urban design. And in reality, we won a competition in 2011. So about, it was called the Jade Eco Park, and now it's called Central Park in Taichung in Taiwan. And for that project in 2011, we were introducing, the client wanted to an ecological part. So it was like the brief of the competition. It was an international competition. We won that with Catherine Mosbar and Ricky Liu. And for this project, we start to introduce climatic approach to say, okay, is it possible to design the composition of the landscape through climate? So it means let's see if there is some area in the park. It was an existing airport, so we have to transform everything. And so we were looking to the question of the comfort outside. So is it possible to cool or to find some colder space, because Taiwan is a hot, humid, tropical climate. So we are looking for coolness, outside. So is it possible to find some area where it's more cold, some area that is less humid, and some area where it's less polluted? And from that, we make 3 layers, one about convection. So it was about the wind, when it's warm, if you blow on the skin, if you have a fan or something like that, you can cool because there is a wind that removes more quickly the heat coming from the body. And so this is a cooling convection phenomena. And we made with a computational fluid dynamic with a Transsolar company in Germany, we made an analysis of all the wind coming on the park, on this empty space at the beginning. And we can see, according to the existing building that was the future building that will be built around the park, where the wind will go more quickly or less quickly, where there is more or less wind. And this wind, because it's coming from the north, it can be a cooling wind. So from that, we made the form, where there is a lot of wind, it will be cold. Where there is less wind, it will be more warm. And we designed the composition of the park according to that. And we made the same for pollution and for humidity of the air. And from that, we, it was making some composition, some urban composition, because the line was following the climate, the wind, and also the light, the sunlight, and things like that. And this is something that I'm using now in some urban project. For example, we are working on for the city in Aix-en-Provence. For it's a development of a new district, for example, and the type of composition of the block of the new district were not linked really to climate. So what we did, we analyzed the wind because we are suffering today from heat wave. It's too hot during the summer. So how to cool the city? This is a big challenge everywhere in France or in Switzerland. This problem of heat during the summer is becoming maybe one of the most crucial question in the urban design. And so from that, we are doing some analysis of the wind, and we are opening the block to let the wind going through, so we can cool the courtyard, we can cool the city, we can not block the hot air, but remove the hot air with the wind, and maybe the pollutant will be also removed by letting the wind. And then we can also analyze the sunlight, where it's come. So it means that the design of the city can be made also with this climatic approach. And for example, it's also interesting in terms of public space, because in different projects we have proposed, for example, we have proposed to create some public space linked with this some climatic quality. For example, we say, okay, here it will be more the winter plaza, the winter place, because it will be full of sun, protected from the wind. But here it will be the summer plaza, so it will be with no light, no sunlight, and full of wind. So you can start to imagine that, okay, this boulevard can be a cool boulevard, this boulevard used for the summer, or this one can be like a warm boulevard used for the winter, or with this side and this side. So you start to imagine how you can live inside that, and to design the space and maybe the function linked to that. And this is, we won a competition with OMA in Milan, and this is, we create the urban composition according to the wind, and we create like what we call the limpidarium. So it was a new type of public space, like in between a cleaning space and a park, landscape, And so the wind arrive, and it's cool. We create like how to cool a maximum the air. And because it will be cold, and because somewhere else there is some hot area, with the sun, so it creates a wind. And so we create all the streets, the new street, parallel to the wind. So all the new district let the wind going through, and so all the pollutant and the heat can go with the air. So, and we have the first prize for that, by introducing in Milano. We won this competition in 2019. So in 2018, I remember it was super hot during the summer. So everybody are suffering from heat. So of course, we want to find solution today for cooling the city. During the winter, it's less problematic, because you can have a hat, you can have an anorak, so you can be protected from the coldness. But during the summer, you cannot remove your skin. If it is hot, you have to find a solution. So this is why to talk about the city and the summer is more crucial than during the winter.
I mean, when you talk about it, it just sounds like common sense. And there are, of course, interesting examples of architects from the past applying similar theories, but in a much more improvisational way. For example, when Eileen Gray was planning the design of E1027, her house on the cliffs of Montreux, the south of France, she camped there in a tent so she could measure the sun's passage around the house, the winds, and so on, and so created this magical space accordingly, where you really do feel enmeshed in natural elements. And When you describe climatic architecture, it sounds so logical that it seems astonishing that the principles aren't applied more widely. Why is that?
I think the modern architecture from Ellen Gray, from the 1920, for example, it was still integrating some climatic and health issue, because I think the big change was in 1950, because in 1950, antibiotic, vaccine, and air conditioning, and a lot of use of oil and energy start really in 1950. Before that it was okay. It was the beginning, but it was not, an antibiotic was not there before 1940. So it means that health and climate was still important during the modernity, and Le Corbusier, a lot of project is based on health issue of tuberculosis and heliotherapy with the light, and but after 1950, we forget everything, because it was not so much so important. You can have a small window like Aldo Rossi. Aldo Rossi was doing small windows, in building. It was no more large window like Ellen Gray, or looking for sun for health reason, because at the moment of Aldo Rossi, if you are sick, you take an antibiotic during 1 week and it's okay. So you don't need anymore to create a building according to health, or you don't need anymore to build a building according to sun, because you have electricity, artificial lighting, or if you don't need to build something according to coldness or heat, because you are air conditioning and you have radiators. So it means all this type of infrastructure, climatic infrastructure or health issue disappear in a certain way, because it was solved by antibiotic and by oil, so nobody care anymore about that. So all the architects start to focusing on something else, on what is the narrative, what is symbolism, or what is some other that was completely legitimate during the second part of the 20th century, because there is no more energy problem, no more health problems. In fact, it was very little. At the beginning of the 20th century, we can imagine to live, the expectancy of life was 40 years. And at the end of the 20th century, it was 80 years. So it's double, it's completely changed. And so, what's happened, more recently, it's the global warming, I think, and maybe the COVID-19 also gives something else. There is maybe a kind of return of material problem. Okay, we can no more use oil and energy as we want, or we cannot think that bacteria and virus are not so important. So it means the material conditions are coming back, and so it's why I think this common sense, as you say, was forget during 50 years or 70 years, because oil and antibiotic was solving everything. So we were not really thinking about that, and so now it's come back, because we cannot use so much energy. We have to stop to use fossil energy because it's emitting CO2. So, and the heat wave and the global warming is becoming real for now, so it's mean this common sense is coming back.
Sure. I mean, we're obviously all too aware of the gravity of the problems that this reckless consumption of fossil fuel energy, antibiotics, and so on has created. But looking at life right now, what needs to change in order to rectify this? Is it legislation, investment, public and political support, the way architecture is practiced, the attitudes of contractors and clients, or all of the above?
Yeah, I think the awareness of what is happening is here. I think, of course, there is how to say that. I think everybody understands the global warming today, and everybody are suffering some part of the global warming. because of flood, because of heat waves, because of dryness, because of and so there is consequence in the price of the food and the price of the energy. So I think I think this beginning of the effect of global warming and the future will be migration, because some part of the planet can be no more inhabit, because it will be too hot, too humid, and so you can no more survive there. So it means people will start to move, and some social trouble and war and things. So it can arrive with all this type of change of the infrastructure. So I think people understand that, but the way we are changing. Mies van der Rohe was saying once that the way of changing take more time of changing idea take more time than changing the material condition. Sometimes. And so I think there is a kind of delay in the way of reacting to that. But I have to say that for me, something changed in 2019. Before that, talking about climate was something very little, or the architect were thinking, okay, it's only a technical problem. But since 2019, for me, there is a change at that moment. Architects are aware about that, and I can see that a lot of my colleagues that were absolutely not interested in this type of topic like 5 years ago, now they are interested into that. So I think it's also a responsibility of the architect. It's not only a responsibility of only the politic, or only it's to change your mind according to what is happening with the global warming.
And some of the most compelling examples of climatic architecture are the work of anonymous self-taught designers, often living among indigenous communities in remote places with scarce resources in the global south, the very people you've just alluded to, who may have to leave their homes because of the climate crisis. Now, they've used their skills and knowledge, and critically their instincts, to design and build homes and other structures that fulfill many of the goals you've talked about and are seemingly better suited to their climates than the work of supposedly better funded and educated counterparts in the global north. Why is this?
I think the effect today is this change of climate, and this is also interesting in terms of culture. So it means that before air conditioning in the what you call the global south, maybe, or if we look to the Mexico, north of Africa, and Iraq, or this type of climate was hot. And now it's moving to the north. There is this. We say that the climate, the temperature of that were in the north of Africa in 2100, it will be in Paris. So it means that there is a kind of cultural change that will come with that. So because we are thinking that culture and maybe tradition and some aesthetic are linked only to culture, but in reality it's also linked to the material conditions. So if you have this type of material or this type of climate, for example, large clothes is better for hot climate, because you can, the wind can go in under and cool your body by convection and remove more quickly the evaporation. And so large clothes are good for cooling, and slim clothes are good for when it's cold, because it creates a thermal insulation and it block all the convective movement. So the type of the fashion design, was also according to this type of climatic. And so today there is a move, from the south to the north. So it means the architecture in Paris in 2100 maybe will look like the architecture of Tunisia during today, or before air conditioning, because the solution to how to escape from the heat, escape from the dryness, escape from the flood during, because now in Paris or, in France, there is big rain. It was not the case before. It's more tropical rain because the air is more hot and it can contain more water, vapor. And so it's bigger rain. So this type of problem was more the problem of tropical area or desertic area. So then it moved to the north. And so we have to learn a lot from the south now. And so this is what we are doing for Biennale in Versailles for next year. Next year, in 2025, we are proposing to look to this solution, this cultural and architectural solution from the south, because it will be the next the reality and the aesthetic of the north in 2100.
And so finally, Philippe, how do you hope and expect climatic architecture will evolve in future?
What I can see is that, more and more in France is really strong, but everywhere it's becoming stronger and stronger. It means like, okay, now if you are looking to urban design plan proposal, okay, most of them are about climatic solution for cooling the city, like planting a lot of trees or removing the solid element of the ground to let the rain going down. So it means that it's becoming more and more the reality of the design, and for the building, it's still a little. It's not so strong today. Of course, there is a lot of things about the carbon footprint. For example, we prefer to have wood or stone building than concrete building or steel building because the carbon footprint is lower. So it changed also the aesthetic. So for me, there is a change. The climatic approach is everywhere. It's touching the things. And I will also will be the curator also of the Saint-Étienne Biennale, Design Biennale in 2025 for one section. And it will be also about decoration, a carpet, for example. Is it possible to have a cooling carpet, made of stone or made of steel? Or because a lot of young designers now are reintegrating some idea of decoration, idea of interior design linked to some climatic approach. We have to be a little more humble, as human. We are not the only author of our building. Gravity, rain, coolness, heat is also part of the design, and this is what I'm integrating. I'm trying to say, okay, the form of the building will not be only my subjectivity, crazy idea. It will be also driven by convection or driven by the wind. So this is a little this kind of humble human position, in this in what is happening today with the global warming.
Well, Philippe, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. It's been fascinating to hear about it. And thank you to all of you for listening. You can find images of Philippe's work on our Instagram feed at design.emergency. And in the hope of making Design Emergency more accessible, we've added alt text for people with visual impairments and a transcript of each episode, which you can access using the link in our bio. We look forward to welcoming you back to Design Emergency soon, when we'll be talking to another global design leader who, like Philippe Rahm, is forging positive change. Goodbye.